Good morning, and welcome to Black Hat. This is my first Black Hat, and hopefully not the last one. It's my pleasure to be here today with you and to welcome you to this conference. As Jeff said, I'm the person responsible at BindView for all our product operations, which include development as well as support. And I'll invite all of you to visit our booth just around the corner and make sure you walk away understanding what we do, if you will, please. Now let me offer an introduction of our keynote speaker, Paul Simmonds. Paul is the Global Information Security Director at ISI Jericho Forum. As many of you know, his career makes him an excellent candidate to be the keynote speaker today. Paul heads the information security function and works with the CIO's office of ISI in London. Prior to joining ISI, he spent a short time with a high security web hosting company as head of information security and 7 years with Motorola in a global information security role. Paul is a founding member of the Jericho Forum, a pan-global group of corporate companies working to define the issues and benefits of operating in a deperimeterized environment, and that is a mouthful. He's worked with a broad spectrum of agencies, including the FBI, the Scotland Yard, Wiltshire Computer Crime, and Wiltshire Child Protection. Paul holds a degree in electronic engineering in a city and guilds in radio communications. He comes to the information security field with a background in IT systems implementation and consultancy, during which he wrote and implemented one of the UK's first websites. Join me in welcoming Paul.
Good morning. Oh, that's terrible. Good morning. Thank you very much. Very nice to be with you. And wow, what a lot of people. Deperimeterisation, as you quite rightly said, it's a real mouthful. And one that I hope will have you tripping off your tongue by the end of Black Hat, because we think it's probably this decade's security challenge. To tell you a little bit about ICI, ICI is the day job. Jericho Forum is the unpaid job. ICI, if I was speaking to a British audience, you'll probably notice the British accent. But if I was speaking to a British audience, ICI is a household name in Europe and certainly the old British Empire. It's been around since 1928. You'd know us in the US as Glidden Paints, Liquid Nails, various other products like that. That's our commercial side. $12 billion turnover. I operate in 335 sites over 55 countries globally and have 36,000 employees. That's just to give you a flavor for where I'm coming from, so you can put that into context with the presentation. That said, there is no "this is ICI" slide in there, so that was it. So what do we face as a problem? For those of you out there who are working in corporates, if you haven't noticed it by now, everything we do, be it business, security, anything, it's business driven. Your projects have to have a return on investment. Cost, and more cost saving is your management mantra. If there's anyone out there whose management is not saying save cost, save cost, save cost to you, can you please tell me in the break, because I'd like to come and work for you? That's the reality we face today. And of course, the other business pressure we're getting is speed to market. And of course, lack of cost or lack of ability to spend money and speed to market are quite often the enemies of good security. So security, where are we on security? If you haven't noticed it yet, we've lost the war on good security. We let in both port 80 and port 25. That's where all the decent in inverted commas, exploits come from these days. The so-called blended threat, the old M&M model, the hard, crunchy outer shell, corporate network, which is protected at its border, and once you get inside is all soft and squishy, and the sweets are in there, the goodies that you actually want to go and get as a hacker. That model that the corporates have been using for the last 10 to 15 years is old hat. It's non-sustainable. The problem is that the corporates out there are in denial. They keep telling their management, we have wonderful firewalls at our perimeter, we're secure. But that's what they're telling the board. That's what they're telling the audit committee. When they're getting audited, Ernst & Young and KPMG and whoever else are coming in and say, how are you managing your border firewalls? And my first question to them is, well, why? Because, as I said before, I have 335 sites. And whereas if I want some information out of ICI, and I go into the London office and say, well, I'm going to give you $10,000 to give me this information, the guy in there will probably say no way and report you. If they go into my operation into Vietnam and say to the IT manager there, I'd just like you to put this black box in your computer room and plug it into your network, please, and I'll give you £10,000. That's 5 years' salary. Temptation is an awful lot different. That's the reality of the problems we face out there in the global economy. And this original slide pack, way back in a very early incarnation, was presented as RSA in Amsterdam last year. And that was the Dutch analogy. And I hope you know the story of the little boy who puts his finger in the dike and stays there for a couple of days to stop the dam bursting and Holland getting flooded. And I feel like that at times when we have a Sasa or a blaster or whatever. I feel like the boy with his finger in the dike trying to stop this stuff. And behind me, the dam's gone. And the sooner we start realizing it, the better. So let's talk specifically about Blaster. You haven't seen the stats on Blaster, and I've yet to see the stats come out on Sasa, but a majority of global corporations were affected by Blaster. The unofficial stats that I've seen put it at somewhere close to 95% of corporate organizations were hit. These are a couple of stats that were done for InfoSec, which is the largest European security show, and it's a biannual survey done by the UK government of corporates, businesses and corporates in the UK, telling them what they got hit with last year. And it was released April this year, so it's pretty up to date. The scary one is look at the frequency of the update of their AV software. Now, when you add to it this little bit in the bottom, which says, actually, what those graphs don't tell you, or the pie charts don't tell you, is that 13% of the PCs surveyed had no AV on at all. And this is businesses. This isn't home users. This is responsible businesses. And what that leads you to say is that, realistically, you have to work on the principle that 30% of your computers at any point in time have ineffective antivirus. Now, we can argue about whether it's 3% or 30%. The reality, it doesn't matter. Because when you looked, and when I talk to my opposite numbers, global CISOs out there, and say to them, how do you reckon Blaster or Sasa got into your organizations? The one thing they will say is always the same. We reckon someone was connected to the internet with their laptop, they put the lid down to put it into suspend, they walked into the corporation, lifted the lid, and the rest was history. It only takes one computer. So the argument about whether it's 3% or 30% is totally irrelevant. It only takes one computer. So I don't know if it's a book. I haven't looked on the bookstall yet. I don't think that one's out there. So is it so much for the core perimeter? And if you pardon the pun, it's 11 p.m. and do you know where your data is? Being the owner of a 16-year-old daughter. Once upon a time, you know, when I started this game back in the early 90s, things were really simple. We either employed staff or we didn't. And, you know, you gave your staff access and you didn't give the people who weren't staff, they didn't get access to your systems. Now, of course, we employ every variant under the sun, from contractors to temporary staff to consultants on a 2-week semi-permanent contract. It's ridiculous. You go to any corporate, they will have 50 ways of employing people. How do you know whether you give those people access, especially when, like me, you've got 37,000 employees around the world? And of course, once upon a time, we made no external connections, did we? It was a nice little standalone network, and then they said, oh, we'd like to do some emails, so we put an email link in, and then, oh, by the way, we'd like to do the web. Now, of course, you know, we do everything, don't we? We link to the internet, we link to clients, we link to joint ventures, we link to third parties. I have a thing called an external connections database, where theoretically, I say theoretically, yeah, some people know what's coming, don't they? Theoretically, I list every external connection to my corporate network. In reality, I'm a realist. I know that I don't have every external connection. I probably have about 90% of them. But the reality is, we have every way of connecting. I have about 300 different ways of connecting to external parties. And they're a mix of good, bad, and indifferent. Some are historic, some are new, some are really nice and secure. But the reality of the situation is that the further away you get within a corporation of the locus of control, in other words, in our case, London. So when you get out to Asia Pac and China and Brazil, business expediency rules, and you find all of a sudden they've gone out to a local ISP and there's a Linksys firewall, off-the-shelf configured, connecting your network with a NAT address to a local ISP out there. And that's the reality we face. So is it goodbye data security then? Or maybe what we actually need is a new model. And this is a model we pinched, stolen from another industry. And this is the industry that protects the money at the end of the day. So Bill's doing funny things on me. Here we have an industry that hauled money, and for those of you who don't know the history of the money hauling industry, basically the situation that most people faced is after World War II, we trained an awful lot of people around the world to go out and kill people, and how to fire guns, and then of course we left them all unemployed because we'd won the war. So we had a slight problem. So all these unemployed people started robbing banks because that was a fairly easy way to get money and they were trained for it. Wonderful, huh? Okay, so what did they do? Well, they went and bought armored cars, and they were literally that. They were army surplus armored cars. That's why they're called an armored car, from, you know, that war that was going on. And over the years, they armored them properly. So they took a custom truck, they paid £100,000 or whatever, forget the figures, to customize a truck to protect the money. What do we do these days? Who's been onto a gas forecourt recently and got money? Are the gas? Did they have? I haven't bought gas here for a while, but over in Britain, you can now walk into a gas forecourt, pay for your gas with your credit card, walk over to a little box that's sitting there in the middle of the floor, plugged into the power outlet, and it will give you money. You put your card in, and it spews money out at you. And all it's got is a straight connection to the local power outlet and some kind of internet connection. Why? Because what they've figured out as an industry is what they're trying to protect is not the armored car, not the people in it. The people in there are briefed. If someone comes to rob you, give them the money. What they're protecting these days is just the money. They take one of these fantastic little containers, and by the way, it's an ICI product, which is why I'm allowed to use the copyright on the photograph, no other reason. They pay £10,000 or a tenth for this wonderful high-tech container, which when you force it open, explodes everywhere with this red dye. It voids the money. All the cashiers around the world are trained that if this thing's covered in dye, you don't accept it. And it covers you with stuff that it takes you about a month to get off. Very nice. So if anyone was thinking of robbing one of these money machines, don't. It's not worth it. The reality of the situation is that there's an industry that's discovered what they're trying to protect. They're trying to protect the money. What are we as corporates and as companies or even users trying to protect? What we're actually trying to protect is the data on our machines. It's the data that has value. In my case, it's the data that is tied up in my research and development. Some of our products take up to 10 years to come to market. That research, that work, that development is tied up on a computer somewhere in my organization. Of course, the other thing is, if you didn't see the announcement a little over a year ago, Gartner said IDS is dead. Well, they didn't actually say that. That's what they actually said. I went and looked it up. And for those of you who do Gartner, they did this wonderful thing called the Trough of Disillusionment. The reality is, if you want another analogy, is that I got the intelligence that someone's coming to burgle my house. And unlike the days of yesteryear, they don't come these days dressed in stripy jumpers with the mask and the swag over their shoulder. So I've got the intelligence. Where do I go and sit? Do I go and sit down at my local railway station and try to spot the people coming off the train? Of course I don't. I'd be totally stupid to do that, wouldn't I? So okay, so now do I screen the people coming up my drive? Well, there's a whole bunch of people who come up my drive on a very regular basis, from the people collecting the rubbish, 3 types of recyclable rubbish now, so I've got 4 trips. I've got the guy, in Britain we have postmen who walk up my drive and they put my letters through my door. So the postman comes up my drive and puts my letters through my door, door-to-door salesman. Maybe I don't want the door-to-door salesman, but they've still got a reasonably legitimate reason for coming up my drive. So there's a whole bunch of people. Can I spot them? Not really. So what I actually want to do is spot anomalous behavior. If the postman walks up my drive, and I can define a pattern for the postman, he gets out of his van, he walks up my drive, he puts my letters through my door, and he walks down my drive again. If the postman comes up my drive, puts my letters through my door, and then goes and tries my doors and windows, I've got to be fairly certain that either the postman is compromised or he's not the postman. Now, exactly the same goes for IP packets. The only way you can spot an anomalous set of IP packets is getting as close to what you're trying to protect as possible, so you can define a set of rules. It is no good sitting at the perimeter or the railway station trying to spot this stuff coming in, because you ain't going to do it. So what's the new cost model? We reckon currently as a corporate, it's probably slightly, this slide's been around since the original slide pack, so this is about a year ago. But we reckon for the ballpark for a fully serviced Ethernet port with internet connectivity is around about 15 to 20 bucks a month. And that includes everything. The help desk, the man to come out and install it for me, the person to fix it, the replacement when it goes wrong, the support, everything else. Ask yourself as a business, what is the true cost of your Ethernet ports? And include your WAN, your borders, your firewalls, your security, your routers, your switches, your staff, your support, everything in there, divided by the number of ports you have connected. And if it is less than 15 bucks a month, sorry, if it's more than 15 bucks a month, you should ask yourself seriously, why am I doing it? And do you actually still need a border? Because if you accept that you don't need a border anymore, and actually all your border is actually is a sieve, it's keeping out the lumps, it's keeping out the script kiddies, it's keeping out the denial of service attacks, it does that very effectively. But all it's actually doing is acting as a quality of service boundary for you. And so in reality, your border, and in some cases your entire corporate WAN, becomes a return on investment justification only. And it's an interesting discussion to have when the security people go out and start talking to the business about the whole secure perimeter as a return on investment justification, because they look at you as if they're mad. But it's an interesting discussion to have, and all of a sudden your business people start looking at you as a true business partner, as opposed to those boys who like to say no. There are also business benefits. We did this exercise with the ICI Paints division, and they brought their global CIOs in for a meeting in London, and we did a half-day workshop with them on this subject of what they could leverage in terms of business environment if they went to a deperimeterized solution. So we looked at what it cost them to put in a traditional sales office, and we saw at the time, this was about 6 months ago, so we were joking about somewhere in the world that probably needed some filler and some paint, and we sort of said, well, what would it take you to put a sales office into Baghdad? And that's what we came up with. And we reckon the time to market probably for normal parts of the world anywhere sort of to 6 months, and probably if we wanted to go into Baghdad at the moment with a sales force, it would probably take between 9 months and 12 months to get anything secure in there. Mainly because the CIA won't let you run encrypted lines in the moment for some reason, but there we are. Deperimeterized option. Very simple. You put your people on a plane with their laptops and their encrypted voice over IP phones. You go and buy the equivalent of a fully serviced office with Ethernet on the desk. You don't care whether it's secure or insecure or not, and you go and plug in. And you're up and running as fast as you can sign that contract on that building and put people on an airplane. Serious business benefits. So what is deperimeterization not? It's certainly not removing your border security. I wouldn't tell you to go out and do that at the moment. I wouldn't say get rid of your firewalls. It maybe got bits to do with web services, it's got bits to do with document repositories. When I've talked to people about this before, I get salespeople coming up to me and say afterwards, and they say, I've got the answer to all your problems. And you think, yeah, okay, fine. It's refreshing to see that I do occasionally have salespeople who come up to me and say, I think I see where we play in this, and we solve just this little niche problem. And generally I'll go and talk to them then. Is it a sales opportunity? Probably in the future. And it probably involves all of some of those. But none of those alone is a solution. So what is it? Fundamentally, it's an acceptance that most of your exploits are going to transit your perimeter. If you haven't figured that one out, I mean, you're all security professionals in this room, so hopefully I'm preaching to the converted on that particular issue. IDS has little or no benefit sitting at your perimeter. That ultimately it's easier to get, the easier it is to protect the data, the closer you get to it, because you can define what that data should be doing, more accurately define who should be having access to it. And then ultimately for a business, that a hardened security perimeter is totally at odds with current or future business needs. And therefore, that a hardened perimeter security strategy is totally unsustainable. And the problem is, of course, that the bigwigs, you've just finished convincing all your bigwigs about you need border security, you need these deep packet inspection firewalls, and they were very expensive, and you had to sign off on them, and they had to be signed off at a very high level. And you're now going to them and saying, well, actually, remember that investment you made a year and a half ago? Forget it. You're going to have to do something else now. So it's an interesting sell. So what is deperimeterization? It's not a solution. I'm not standing up here offering you a solution. What I'm standing up here offering you is a concept. And it's a concept for you to develop for your businesses. Ultimately, it's how you solve the business needs for your business, and your mileage will vary as you try to implement this, because the way you do business and the way you operate will be different from the way I do business and I operate. But it's how you solve that in a common way such that it's going to interoperate without the hardened perimeter. And more importantly, because you're going to have to go to the board and sell this, you're going to have to go to your CIO and sell this, you're going to have to go to the business and sell this, it's how the businesses leverage the new opportunities that come from operating without a border. Because if you can operate without a border, you can operate without a DMZ, then you open up a whole load of business possibilities. Just imagine you go out, you're told by the board on Monday morning, it's been hush-hush because of all the SEC regulations and everything else, that you've bought this company. Oh, and by the way, we'd like to be doing e-commerce with them and totally integrated by Friday. It happens. I'm sure some of you have been there. I certainly have. The reality of the situation is that your only option is to say at the moment, well, we're going to need to go and analyze what they've got. We're going to have to go and look at, we'll do some temporary connections, but for the time being, they're going to have to come in through our DMZ. We can put in a site-to-site VPN lease line, whatever, maybe do it over the internet. We'll put some proxy equipment into our DMZ and their DMZ, and probably we'll have you up and running in about 2 to 3 months. And no wonder we have a reputation as an industry for the people who like to say no. The reality is, if you don't have your DMZ there, you don't have your border there, it's very simple. You choose your secure protocol to do business with, and they are out there. Go and look at the protocol for something like AS2, which is what UPS, the delivery people, are using with people like Walmart. So you go and choose your secure, authenticated, repudiatable protocol off the shelf, and you say, here's my IP address, here's your IP address, and they're both inside the core of your business, and here's the protocol we're going to use. You can do it, but not with your current architectures. So ultimately, deperimeterization is all about, it's a set of solutions by which we can interoperate and we can pick and mix from. It is defense in depth. We've talked about defense in depth. The only people really who've done serious defense in depth are the military, because they've had the money to throw at it. Corporates have talked about defense in depth for a long time, but in reality, they've just put in borders. And of course, the big problem, it has to be open, it has to be interoperable, and it has to be OS agnostic. And finally, with things like Liberty Alliance, we're starting to actually come to the realization that we all need to play one game. It needs to be interoperable. It can't be a Sun solution. It can't be a Microsoft solution. It can't be an Oracle solution. Perm any 5 companies, any which way you like, with their proprietary solutions. So that, if you like, is the theory. How do you get from where we are today to where we need to be tomorrow? And I'm going to talk a little bit about Jericho and Jericho's involvement in all this. And what Jericho has been working to define, and certainly as a place to hang your hat, sort of these 4 phases to deperimeterization. Just so we can discuss the topic more importantly. And I'm going to go into these in just a little bit more detail, so bear with me while I just roll through this slide. Phase 1 is move outside of your perimeter. If you don't need to be inside your core perimeter, why is it there? Get it out. Phase 2 is remove your hardened perimeter if you don't need it. Phase 3 is the ability, if you wish to, as a business, to operate without your hardened perimeter. You might choose not to, but you might want to. And ultimately, phase 4 is the blue sky stuff, is where the banks and the money hauling industry's got to, is actually, let's protect the data rather than the systems. But that's real blue sky stuff. So phase one, and hopefully phase one will seem very familiar to a lot of you. And for anyone who's been sitting there and think, well, this stuff seems to be really difficult, and actually I don't think I really want to go there, I'd like to tell you that I suspect most of you in here are doing phase one now. So welcome on board. The reality is, I mean, who in the room is who's using a laptop with a VPN connection? Absolutely, right, okay? So, you don't need to be inside the corporate perimeter to work. You are connecting in a hotel. It'd be nice to connect in this hotel when I can get the wireless connection, but certainly I can't in my room. But most hotels where I travel these days, I go in, I plug into my network connection in the hotel room, or fire up the wireless, and I make a VPN tunnel into my corporate, and I'm there. And I'm operating in a deperimeterized environment. I'm operating totally outside my corporate perimeter. Solutions, web services, yeah, lots of hype around those. We use this term internally called lean client because thin client was a bit of a misnomer. Thin client covered a variety of sins. And so we define thin client as the standalone custom WISE terminal, also known as what we all used to know and love as an X terminal. In other words, it's a custom dedicated display screen with some intelligence in it. And that is thin client. Lean client is a standard Windows or Linux build with a minimal set of components to get you running. In our case, it's Windows, it's Lotus Notes, and it's Internet Explorer and the Office suite. But that's it. None of our 200, 300 bespoke applications loaded on there. Because that's what it costs, that's what costs your business to maintain. And thick client is your traditional thick client with all those applications loaded and everything else and all the headaches you have around supporting it and the fact that I want to load my latest set of Microsoft security patches this week and next week and the week after and the week after that. And the business is telling me, yes, but you haven't tried this with my 300 line of business applications and you can't do that for fear you break one. And that isn't sustainable, as we all know. Issues around that? We can only see two issues. That first of all is secure use of non-secure computers, particularly email in internet cafes. For any of you who travel to Moscow, I wouldn't recommend doing email in your internet cafe because most internet cafes in Moscow are run by the mafia and most of them have hardware keyboard loggers sitting between the keyboard and your computer. So we do have some issues, but not many. And the other problem is as you move this stuff out, we have a problem with single sign-on. So the more you web host particular applications, and the more you have discrete islands of security within your business, the more you have a problem of, yes, it's another username and password to remember. And we all know what happens when you give people 15 username and passwords. Well, they write them down in their diary or their iPad or write it on a yellow sticky 3M Post-it note. So, but those are the only real issues. Phase two. As we talked about here, the border becomes a quality of service boundary. You can have some interesting discussions with your business. Last year, we put in a brand spanking new AT&T supplied MPLS global WAN. Cost us an awful lot of money, saved us quite a bit as well. Really nice, performs really well. Out of my 335 sites, we gave the businesses a number of options and said, how would you like to connect? And depending on what you choose, it'll cost you. So of course the Rolls-Royce solution is you go and have diversely routed 2 pipes coming into your site, load balanced, all singing, all dancing, cost you an arm and a leg. And surprise, surprise, out of my 335 sites, only 20 of our sites were deemed to be critical enough to pay that kind of money. And I suspect it's fairly similar for you guys out there. Now the discussion you then go and have with your business is say, if you're going to live in a deperimeterized environment and you're actually going to connect your people to the internet, and we're going to shrink the perimeter to a quality of service boundary, the only place you were prepared to pay for quality of service was on 20 out of those 335 sites. So why aren't we connecting the rest of those sites direct to the internet? It's an interesting discussion to have, especially when you walk to the business and say, in my case, that's going to save us £2 million a year if we did that. And I'm not saying we're going to. Possible solutions. Here's an interesting one. The first one on that list, all corporate network devices only allow encrypted protocols. Someone threw that out as a bit of a joke. And the more the day we went on, and we thought, actually, that's not such a daft idea. Because if you actually changed all your corporate routers just to only allow encrypted protocols, you'd kill all the exploits stone dead. You'd probably kill most of your business traffic stone dead as well as it stands today. But what would it take you to transition your business systems to secure protocols? Especially if you're going towards web services and you deliver them via SSL. Interesting question. Islands of secure data, so as you start to shrink your perimeter, you end up with what someone termed as islands of secure data. Issues with it? Well, as I've just alluded to, availability of systems and OS support for the above. And obviously, because we're now distributing our security, we need to be able to correlate all that security information. And that's a challenge in itself. Phase 3, no perimeter. Here's where you actually need to start doing multiple on-the-fly, authenticated in the background. None of this, I'm making a VPN tunnel from my laptop, and it's going into the corporate, and it's the only connection I'm going to make. It's much more, I'm going to make a connection here, a connection there, I'm going to open it, I'm going to break it, I'm going to run multiple VPN connections from my laptop to wherever I need to get the data from. And it's doing it from my laptop to the system it's trying to talk to, straight through the border. You can't connect. If you're trying to get data out of a system, it's brain dead at the moment. I see the system, I see the folder, I drill right down to it, I can see the data, and only when I say, can I have that file, it says, can't have it. Think about it. It should be the other way round from a security point of view. If there's nothing on that server that I have rights to see, why can I see the server in the first place? Possible solutions. Very interesting discussion on the first one with the CISO of Oracle. On-the-fly authentication, as we talked about, application-level firewalls and IDS. If you're bringing your tunnels in to your web server on HTTPS, and your tunnel terminates, and your application starts, where should your IDS go? It should go at the shim between those two. And it should be application aware. Issues, we're going to have an awful lot of data that we need to classify, and the one thing everyone is lousy at is data classification. We need systems that support data level validation. We need applications that allow granular security. As I said, the Holy Grail. So currently, as we all know, the standard Unix Microsoft world, I copy a file. If I have privileges to read and write, to actually read it, I can grab it. When I rewrite it, well, guess what? It's got the privilege. It's inherited the privileges of the new container I put it in, and me, because I created it. Again, totally brain dead. Tomorrow, what do we need to move to? The file on the disk has to hold the data, and it's encrypted with the specific read and write privileges. You copy the file to another server. Guess what? Those original privileges go with it. Theoretically, I can write the file, and I want to send it to Jeff, and I can send it to every single one of you in this room, and the only person who can read it is Jeff. And guess what? It doesn't matter if I'm on Microsoft and he's on Unix, because it'll work. And yes, you can do it. There are companies out there, there are niche companies out there who are doing just that. Big issues, cross-company global authentication. There is work going on out there at the moment on federated identities. It is an all-new application set. It is standards for data classification. I'm sure you can see most of the problems yourself. So can you do this tomorrow? No, in reality you can't. Here's where we think it'll go. Corporates are doing phase 1 today. Corporates are starting to do it, phase 2 today. In reality, we're looking at least 2007, 2008 before we get anything decently data level encryption that starts to be workable. So here are some of the issues. And of course, we all know the problem that the last thing we want to be, we're told to deliver solutions. We're all tired of being at the cutting edge because we have to make this stuff work. But the problem we've got is that I've got salesmen out there trying to deliver me bigger, better deep packet inspection firewalls to sit on my borders that are going to cost me 3 times as much as my previous ones cost me today. And that's not the discussion I want to have. But no one's beating me a path to my door trying to sell me stuff to deperimeterize with. So this is where Jericho fits into all of this. And I bet you never thought you were going to come to a security conference to get the Bible quoted at you. You might even find your own companies on there, and you don't know it yet. If you look at, there are some really interesting ones on there. The 3 interesting ones I always like to point out is Airbus, Boeing, and Rolls-Royce, the aero engine people. And why are they participating in something like Jericho? Well, the reason is quite simple. Is because if they can define open standards and open protocols so that they can do e-business, then the companies they're jointly dealing with, because most of the aircraft components are highly specialized, and they have the same vendors. There are major business advantages for them to doing this and getting standards that everyone agrees on, because then they only have to do it once. Instead of multiple times, multiple bespoke solutions. So where are we on progress? Jericho actually started officially end of January this year. So here's where we are. Gather like-minded corporates and organizations. You've seen the list, we're doing it. We've articulated the problem, you're seeing the slide pack. We put together the framework, the 4 phases for discussion. We've started the industry discussing a problem. Go out and look up deperimeterization, either spelled with an S or a Z, if you're American, in Google, and you will find it. It's a word that we introduced to the computer language. So yes, we are succeeding. I've even seen a checkpoint sales presentation with a deperimeterization word in it. I was trying to work out how they can get deperimeterization and checkpoint border firewalls into the same presentation. But anyway, yes, exactly. The biggest problem that we've got is we're coming from a European perspective. You've probably spotted the British accent. A lot of the companies on that original list were British and European. But we're all global players in some aspect. So the perception that was leveled against us, that we were a European-centric organization, I think if you look at the list now, it's not the case. We are engaging heavily with some major US companies involved on that list, and more are joining us daily. We've been out talking with Howard and his CSO Interchange, and out there presenting in San Francisco about 6 weeks back. And you'll probably start to see some of the press coverage coming through from that. What we've still got to do, we're still road mapping the issues, and that's scheduled with the members. We need to formally produce white papers, which is scheduled for September, and then start formally engaging the vendors, because you won't see any vendors on that list, very deliberately, because what comes out of Jericho can't be tainted with Microsoft or Sun or Cisco or anything else, because we've all seen in the standards body what goes wrong when the vendors get heavily involved and throw $500,000 at the problem. And the new one for us that we're looking at as the Jericho board is how we resolve funding, because at the moment it's free to join. As a corporate, all we ask is that your CISO signs up to it on behalf of the company. We resolve the funding problem to make sure that progress doesn't stagnate. So in closing, the Jericho challenge, and this is my challenge to you, is ultimately it's up to all of us. Me, you, all of us in this room, everyone who's a security professional. Stop designing insecure systems. It is as simple as that. You have to design systems to operate without a firewall. I went and talked to the Royal Bank of Scotland. And the introduction was made by a guy who used to be my number 2 when I was at the high security web hosting company. And he sat there in the middle of this meeting and he said, Paul, I remember what you told me when we used to work together. And I thought, oh, no, what are you going to say? And he said, you have to design a system such that if the firewall fails, it is still inherently secure. What are we doing at the moment? We're taking Microsoft out of the box with all its ports open, and we're putting a firewall in front of it to cover a multitude of sins. And it ain't acceptable. And we have to tell the business it isn't acceptable. And we have to stop doing it. We have to design in the security from ground up. We can't paper over the cracks. We have to go out and demand secure, authenticated protocols to do our business on a day-to-day basis. And you only open the ports that support them, and you disable everything else on the box, not at the firewall, on the box. And when your business says, oh, we're just going to do this high-volume transaction using FTP, you have to say no. Because I'm still getting systems requests coming in from my business, and they say, the people we're talking to have mandated we use FTP. Or I get, by the way, we just like to open our firewall up to the SQL port because this business out there, that's how they synchronize. And I say, go and do a Google search on port whatever it is, and then come back and tell me it's a good idea. But this was a serious company that was trying to do business with us. So refuse insecure protocols. Understand your data flows. It is basic, but we don't do it. We just bolt these systems together in our nice 3-tier e-commerce architecture, and we use the VLAN in between to actually make sure that the data doesn't flow out of it. We don't know what the data is doing inside that VLAN. We have to understand our data flows. We have to test and validate all the data. We have to authenticate all the transactions. And with that, thank you very much.